a pit, hole in the ground, base of the cutting over there, and it was crammed full of waste from a comb maker's workshop, and that was radiocarbon dated back to the 11th century, so that predates the Anglo-Norman conquest, and that tells us that that industry that craft was being practiced up here before the Anglo-Norman conquest. And the pit itself was literally a hole in the ground, but the amount of information that we've been able to get from that, because of the funding that was given to us by the Heritage Council, has been actually astonishing. It has allowed us to gain insights into the technology of the bone and antler industry up here. We know now that they were making these things called composite combs, beautifully decorated, long combs like this, one of which Ian found down in Irishtown some years ago. We know that from examining the little waste bits and pieces of antler from the pit, the types of tools they were using, so they were using saws, knives, chisels. And we also know from these burnt stones called pot boilers that they were heating water and putting the antlers into the water just to soften them, to make it a little bit more pliable before they were worked. So it's told us a lot about the technology of the antler industry up here. It's also told us an awful lot about what the monks were actually eating up here, because the pit was full of food waste and from the monastery, and they were having a ball. They were eating the best of beef, the best of pork, mutton. They were drinking fine wines, and they were eating, very high quality bread, and it's a long way for these guys were supposed to be adhering to the rule of Saint Benedict, which was all about vegetarianism and frugality. We know different now. It also the analysis of the seeds and the charcoals from the pit has also given us a good idea of what the local environment was like here as well. So it tells us that there was a big open space around here, which fits in with this part of the monastery being a craft workers zone. And it also tells us that surrounding the monastery there was very thick woodland where there was oak and there was elder and very, very old species of kind of primeval woodland maybe. And it was in that woodland that the deer were roaming, that were then their antlers would be used for the industry up here. And I suppose the most important thing that this little excavation has told us though is about what this part of the monastery actually looked like back in the 11th century. And we know now that this was part of a craft working zone, and early medieval monasteries were arranged so that you had a sacred core in the middle, which was the area around the round tower, and that's where the main church would have been, and the graveyard. But then surrounding that then there was an outer zone concentric with that, so it was like the holiest area was in the middle, and then you had a holier area around that again, and it was within that craft were crafts like homemaking were undertaken, things like there would have been settlement here as well. And what we're really trying to find out now is, in the extension of the excavation, is we're trying to find out how extensive was the settlement here, because one of the big questions we have is how urban was Kilkenny before the Normans came here. At the moment it's an open question whether this was a true town or not. The evidence, such as it is, seems to point in that general direction already, that you have craft specialisation being practiced up here, and that's a real marker for urbanism in the pre-Norman world. But we need a little bit more. There's been no structures excavated so far that predate D-Day, the Anglo-Norman conquest up here. And so that's one of the things we're after. There was a geophysical survey done some years ago on the lawn here, and it showed that just in the moat of the lawn there's a very interesting looking rectangular building, which one would wonder, is that the craft workers, is that the actual workshop for the home making industry? So we've all these questions, we're answering some of them. The work to date has been really fascinating, and it's starting to build up a picture for us of what life was like in this monastery, what the place looked like, and also how old it is, which are big questions. And it's quite extraordinary that all of this is covered, and right beside this beautiful building, which is the robing room, which was built by Bishop Richard Pocock in 1758, and he built that. You can see it's very kind of classical looking in its style, and he went on the grand tour all over the classical world, and he obviously brought these influences back to the cathedral here where he was bishop, and he built this robing room primarily as a summer house, a gazebo, a place where himself and his acquaintances could sit and eat sweetmeats and drink fine wine. And there's a semi-basement beneath it, which is probably where he stored the wine, I would imagine. But also in the basement there's an elaborate technology, I suppose you'd call it, whereby a fire was lit in the basement in a fireplace, and the heat from that was drawn up throughout the robing room, and that made all of the lovely wooden seats in the robing room nice and warm for the bishop's bum. So the robing room itself then was connected to the north transept of the cathedral by a thing called a colonnade, which was must have looked extraordinary in its time. It was a covered passageway that linked the room with the north transept, and it was formed from Tuscan columns, and it had this pedimented lead roof, and it was there for about 120 years until it was taken down and recycled. But it must have looked quite extraordinary. And the robing room itself is actually founded on an earlier garden house as well, which dates from the 17th century, possibly from the time after maybe David Wolf's time here in the 1650s. There was a small rectangular garden house there that was then modified by Bishop Pocock into the structure we see here today, which has been so fantastically restored and conserved in the Heritage Council. And that kind of brings the story up to date, I think.